So since it's recording, I'm going to give disclaimers. Legal, right? Okay, so this is basically all my opinion. Because I'm speaking, obviously, it can't be yours. So I'll try to be entertaining, and that's very difficult. I'll try and touch points on a few things. Now, something to remember is that in preparation for this, I actually wrote a very long document because you need to have your thoughts down, right? I'm not going to put all that on the slides. It's going to be very boring. I'm not going to inundate you with numbers. That's going to be very intimidating. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk on a few things, and if you have any questions, I think we are intimate enough that you can ask me, right? Nothing personal, though, about the topic. And then what we can do is that, along the way, let's see that whether we can come to some sort of consensus of what we can do about it. Now, first things first, green finance and investments. Quick question, how many of you are in finance? Any form of finance? Okay. How many of you are in sustainability? That'd be most of you, I guess, right? Others, why come here, right? Okay. Introducing, okay, this topic was given to me. Normally, if I do my own topics, they tend to be a lot shorter. But enough about that. Let's go to the topic itself. Now, this is about continuing the conversation from COP28. So my team and I were at COP28, and I chaired the panel, Carbon Credits, the Next Financial Instrument. It's a very technical, very boring, but 300 people came. I guess people like to be bored. It's a very difficult subject because the fact of the matter is there's a lot of things in the media, there are a lot of papers, there are a lot of discussions on what exactly carbon credits, the democratization of the funding network, people talk about funds, a lot of numbers are thrown around. But at the sum of it, fundamentally, there's a lot of misunderstanding. Now, one of the challenges we have is that a lot of people, surprisingly, don't realize that there's a vast difference between the voluntary market and the compliance market. And they function very differently. And if you go online and you talk about all these, how should I put it, controversies, this greenwashing, all these issues, since we're recorded, I won't mention names and specific events, just in case. Most of it is in the voluntary market. Now, why were we at COP28? We are actually not there for COP28. My team and I were actually there to meet the governments in the region, because that's what Red Sycamore does. We are in the business of creating investment-grade blue carbon credits. You notice I said creating because it's not created yet. It's not as easy as that. So what we need to do is that we needed to go there and speak to ministers, we needed to speak to central banks, we need to speak to a lot of people, and all these discussions are behind the scenes. They are covered by non-disclosure agreements, they are covered by confidentiality, and there are a lot of things that are said. For those of you who deal with governments and supranational agencies, the things that are said in the press release, the things that are said in public are very different from the private conversations. Am I correct? For those of you who have been to COP28, 27, 26, what do you notice? If you are there in those discussions, after all that was said and done, a lot is said and very little is done. Why? Because people don't like each other and they can't get along. They just have to smile in front of the press. But now is the time for us to come together and move beyond that. Now let's talk about regional developments very quickly, right? We can do a few touch points. Number one, we know for a fact that unlike, let's say, the EU, Asia, Singapore, ASEAN have implemented a carbon tax system. In fact, it's in the Middle East in most places. Right? There are very few ETS markets. There's the EU, there's Southern California, there's Korea, there's Japan, there's Australia, there's New Zealand, there's China. These are the big ones. There was South Africa, and then I think it died. Or if not, it's still on life support. Now, why is that so? This is what they don't tell you. Why is it that all these countries are not in the emissions trading system? Officially, they tell you it's because of greenwashing. That's what you heard, right? It's a license to pollute. No, it's not. There's something that's easy for the press, but it doesn't exactly cover the whole issue. It's not as simple as that. The real reason is politics. Currently, the EU ETS is what? 97, 96% of the market? At one time, it was almost 99%, and then the UK started their own. It's about control. This entire discussion, climate change, is about money. That's what it is. People come together with good intentions to do something great because we need to maintain our standard of living. But ultimately, to maintain that standard of living costs a lot of money, and somebody has to pay it. So you know, for example, that yesterday they had this global carbon credit framework, correct? So the devil is in the details. Most of it is in the voluntary market. There's very little agreement on what we're going to do in the compliance market, which is maybe 100 times larger. So I'm going to move on from there, okay? So these are just one or two pictures to prove that I was there, and I've been in discussions with all these governments. I'm not just some guy that's just talking about it. That means I met Minister this and President that behind the scenes to talk about these things. And so far, a lot of it is just talk because it's very hard to get things done. Why? Because there are different levels of government and we need to move it through different areas of legislation. This is to give you a scale, a sense of scale of what needs to be done. And it's not something that any one of us can do alone. And that's why we have all these advocacy networks. We need to work together. So challenges, I'm not going to go into too much detail because later on you're going to have sessions that are going to cover that in greater detail. However, I did write notes about it. If you want, Thibault has it. I know how to pronounce his name because I watch soccer. Okay, now let's talk about something that is not covered today. How are we going to enhance market confidence? One of it is the credit rating challenges. Now, if you were to ask people in different areas of finance, whether it's Jamie Dimon or others, Jamie Dimon, sorry, not Demon. I hope you didn't hear this. What is a carbon credit? Is it a commodity? Is it a financial instrument? Is it an options contract? Or is it just a piece of paper? It really depends on the nature of the structure of it and who you're asking and how they understand it. That is the gist of the credit rating challenge. You can't do a credit rating for something if you don't have a full definition of what it is. We had yesterday, at COP29, the start of the discussion. They haven't agreed to it. Right? When we talk about the loss and damage fund, $700 million have been pledged. The key word is pledged. The money's not there. They promised to give it to you. It's not in the pocket yet. But if you were to Google it, and I'm not going to give you numbers because all of you have smart devices, and whether it's the WEF, the IMF, or whoever it is, they all give you different numbers. So by 2050, we do not meet our climate goals. By 2030, we do not meet the UNSCG. What is the loss in GDP? Regardless of what number they give you, it is a very large number. 700 million is a drop in the bucket. 700 billion is still a drop in the market because we're talking about trillions of dollars that is needed, not to improve our lives, just to maintain our standard of living, to prevent a disaster in our modern history that's unprecedented. And most people have no real idea what it means. They just think the world is going to get hotter. This is not climate change. This is a climate crisis. So we need to address the credit rating challenges. Just like when you have a financial instrument, in that first step to make it something, you need to think about whether you have a Moody's or Fitch, some equivalent, to rate those carbon credits. And we talk about verification and validation. Now the challenge of the VNV is this. If you were to look at it closely, from a compliance perspective, you will say that entities like Vera and Gold actually have very little credibility. Why? Because they are interested parties. They are created by the very people they are supposed to rate. That challenge needs to be addressed. And that's why you have issues like Kariba and Pola and all that. Because these are interested parties rating themselves. It's the same challenge we have in, for example, Islamic finance. Your Sharia consultancy boards, they are owned by the banks to rate their own products. It cannot be done. Then we talk about the voluntary market to the compliance market. I'm going to say something that's slightly controversial. Okay, maybe a lot. The voluntary market has actually run its course. Think about it. Every time you have a new sort of asset or financial instrument, let's say cryptocurrency, it starts out sort of a voluntary market. Anybody can start an exchange. Anybody can launch a coin. Am I correct? And then things happen. Some controversy. Some people who are very influential lose money. Maybe Temasek again, they like to lose our money. And what happens? You have a compliance framework, you got a regulatory framework, and suddenly you got a lot of things to do. Am I correct? That is what's happening in the voluntary market. It is a matter of time that the majority of the voluntary market will be folded into the compliance market. The question is that, are we going to be ahead of the curve for that? Secondly, to meet the requirements of the loss and damage fund, and that's just the loss and damage fund, that means the infrastructure development, the cost of addressing the loss of GDP, we haven't even spoken about human suffering, about hundreds of millions of people that have to move somewhere, and those people have to accept them. We need a secondary market. Why? Because when you go to COP29, COP28, all these things, people talk about best case scenarios, right? You say, we want people to donate. For example, MES, they said Singapore has pledged 500 million, they want to raise like 5 billion or some large number, and they hope that you would donate. People don't even donate to your colleagues' birthday party sometimes. You expect them to donate 500 million, 5 billion, or whatever number. These are imaginary numbers. They look good for the press. So for this to work, it is not an appeal to altruism. It is an appeal to self-interest. That's why we need a secondary market. Let me explain why. Okay, I won't go into this. This is, as it is, a very big topic, and that's actually what I spoke at COP28, right? I won't talk about this. Other people do it. Okay, maybe I'll go back and talk about something else. I got 1 minute. Very quickly, okay? We need a secondary market. For that to work, we need to have our carbon credits agreed upon and rated. Rated to be investment grade. That's one step. Once it's rated as investment grade, then we talk about carbon credit options, futures, derivatives, ETFs, whatever it is. Why? Because when you have a secondary market, there is speculation. The opportunity to make money, even if it's making money of human misery, which is finance in a way, in a sense. Terrible, huh? I'm just talking bad about myself. But the point being that when you have that, suddenly there is liquidity. There is enough funding to do what needs to be done. And the thing is that we are behind the curve and we are behind time. I hope that if there's one thing that we can take away from this is that we need to move the market forward to create a rated financial instrument, a carbon credit that is investment grade, so that we can create a fungible product for an international market. And with that, over to you. Thank you.